The ordinary waitress, the small diner, sat on the corner of a busy street, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the evening sky. Inside, the smell of fried food and coffee filled the air. People came and went, some in a hurry, some just passing time, and moving quickly between the tables was the waitress, carrying plates stacked with burgers, fries, and endless refills of coffee. Her apron was worn, and her shoes had lost their shine. She worked long shifts. Often from morning till late at night, her back ached and her hands were rough from wiping tables and carrying trays to the customers. She was simply the waitress, nothing more. They saw her smile when she greeted them and her patience when children spilled drinks, but very few wondered who she was beyond the uniform. Some regulars liked her. They tipped her well and spoke kindly, but others, mostly young men, who stopped by after work, treated her like a joke. They laughed too loudly when she slipped, and sometimes made comments just loud enough for her to hear. Clumsy hands, one of them once said when she nearly dropped a tray. She forced a smile and kept walking, pretending it did not sting. Yet, when she turned her back, her shoulders dropped and her eyes grew tired. She had a secret, though, a part of her life that no one in the diner knew. After the lights were dimmed and the last customer had left, she often stayed behind, not because she was paid to, but because in the far corner, against the wall, sat an old piano. Dust clung to its keys, and half of them stuck when pressed. But it was enough. In those quiet hours, when the world outside had gone to sleep, she sat at the piano and played. Her fingers moved gently, creating melodies soft and warm. It was the one time of the day when she felt free. No one laughed, no one judged. It was just her and the music. She closed her eyes and let the sound fill the empty diner. Sometimes, even the owner, locking up at the front, paused and listened for a moment before leaving her alone. But during the day, none of that mattered. She was only the waitress again, a woman balancing too many plates, trying to please too many customers at once. Each clang of a glass or a shout for more coffee reminded her of her place. She swallowed her pride, tucked her dream deep inside, and carried on. It wasn't that she disliked her job, she was thankful for it. It paid the bills and kept her moving forward, but there was always that ache in her heart, a voice whispering that she was meant for something more. Still, she never dared to say it out loud. People already thought she was ordinary. And ordinary people were not supposed to dream of stages and lights that night. The diner was more crowded than usual. The booths were filled, and a group of young men took a table near the piano. Their laughter was sharp, the kind that cut through the air. They leaned back in their seats, calling out to her as she hurried past. One spilled his drink on purpose just to watch her clean it up. "Guess you'll need a mop," he chuckled. His friends roared with laughter, and she bent down quietly, wiping the mess without a word. To the rest of the customers, it was just background noise, the kind of behavior you might expect in a late-night diner. But to her, each laugh was heavy, pressing against her chest. She wondered if anyone would ever see her as more than this, more than a pair of hands carrying plates. As the night dragged on, she continued her work, balancing trays, filling cups, and keeping her smile fixed. But deep down, she carried a fire, small but alive. And though no one in the diner knew it, yet that fire was waiting for the right moment to rise. Because the truth was simple. This waitress, the one people teased and overlooked, carried within her a gift strong enough to change the way they saw her forever. All it would take was one chance, one song, and one moment of courage. And when that moment came, the laughter in the diner would turn into silence. Then wonder, then thunderous applause. But for now, she remained the ordinary waitress, moving quietly through the noisy diner, her dream hidden in the corner, waiting patiently with the old piano. A hidden talent. The night at the diner was finally slowing down. The crowd that had filled the booths was thinning, and the noisy group of young men had already stumbled out. leaving behind empty cups and loud echoes of their laughter. The waitress stood by the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, but she did not complain. She stacked plates, gathered silverware, moved through the quiet with her usual patience. Once the last customer left and the front door was locked, the diner changed. The harsh voices and clattering dishes faded, and what remained was silence. It was in this silence that she found her comfort. In the corner sat the old piano, dust on its top and keys chipped with time. Most customers never gave it a glance, but to her, it was the most important thing in the room. She approached it carefully, almost as if it were a friend she had been waiting to see all day. Sitting on the worn bench, she rested her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint buzzing of the neon sign outside. And then she pressed the first key. A soft note floated into the empty diner. She followed it with another, then another, until a melody began to form. Her fingers moved slowly at first, testing the sounds, but soon they danced with ease. The diner, which had been filled with noise and chatter hours earlier, was now filled with music. Music that wrapped around the empty booths and lingered in the air like a secret. This was her hidden world. The part of her no one saw when she played. She was no longer just the tired waitress. She was an artist, a storyteller without words. Each note carried the feeling she kept locked away during the day, her hope, her sadness, her quiet strength. She poured all of it into the piano, letting it flow out of her like a river that could no longer be held back. The owner of the diner sometimes stayed behind to count the money or sweep the floor. On nights like this, he often paused at the door. Listening, he never said much, but his eyes softened when he heard her play. He knew she carried something rare, something worth more than tips and long shifts. Still, he never told her to play for the customers. He knew she wasn't ready yet. For her, the piano was not about fame or attention. It was about freedom. When she sat on that bench, she could forget the teasing voices, the spilled drinks, and the heavy trays. She could forget the aching in her back and the sting of being treated as less. Here, she was more than enough. Sometimes, while playing, she imagined what it might feel like to stand in front of an audience. She pictured people listening quietly, their faces touched by the music. She wondered if her notes could make someone cry, or smile, or remember something they had forgotten. But those thoughts never stayed long. Reality always returned, reminding her that she was only a waitress. In a corner diner, her life was about bills, not stages. Yet, even if no one saw it, her talent was alive, growing stronger every night. She practiced until her fingers grew sore. She tried new songs, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes creating sounds so beautiful they brought tears to her own eyes. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket, filled with scribbled notes and half-written songs. It was her treasure, though no one knew it existed. But life in the diner had a way of reminding her of her place. The next morning, she was back to pouring coffee and serving breakfast. The same customers filled the booths. The same jokes rang out, and she kept the same polite smile. The group of young men returned too, louder than ever. They joked about the piano in the corner, saying it was nothing but decoration. She heard them, but she stayed quiet. Her hands itched to prove them wrong. But fear kept her still. That evening, as she cleaned a table near the piano, one of the men pointed at it. "Bet you don't even know how to play that thing," he said. His friends laughed. She forced a small smile and walked away. But inside, something stirred. It was the same fire that burned each night when she touched the keys. Only this time, it didn't want to stay hidden. She knew she could silence their laughter with one song. She knew she could change the way they saw her, not with words, but with music. But courage is not easy when you've spent so long staying quiet. For now, she walked past the piano, leaving the thought behind. Yet as she turned off the lights that night, she glanced back at it, her heart whispering, one day, because. Though she was still the ordinary waitress, her hidden talent was waiting for the moment when the world would finally hear it. The mockery the next weekend, the diner filled up again. The booths were busy. The counter was lined with cups of steaming coffee. And the smell of grilled food spread through the air. The waitress moved between tables, balancing trays and trying. To keep up with the rush, she offered polite smiles, even when she was tired that night. The same group of young men returned, louder than before. They took the booth near the piano, banging on the table as if they owned the place. Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the sound of clinking glasses from the start. Their eyes followed the waitress. Every move she made seemed to invite another joke. One of them leaned back in his seat and said, "Careful with that tray. Don't drop it." His words carried across the diner. And his friends laughed. She kept walking, her face calm. But her hands tightened around the tray. She set the food down at another table and walked away quickly. Her heart sank, but she would not let them see her break. Later, as she refilled their drinks, another one nodded toward the piano in the corner. "Why's that old thing even here?" he asked. His tone was mocking. "It's probably broken, just like her." The group burst into laughter again. The waitress placed the cups down quietly, forcing herself to smile. But deep inside, something twisted. She had played that piano. For hours, she had poured her soul into its keys. To hear it mocked as nothing more than decoration made her chest ache. She turned away, busying herself with cleaning tables and serving others. But their voices carried, no matter how hard she tried to ignore them. Each laugh felt heavier than the last. Each word reminded her of how invisible she seemed to the world. Just a waitress, someone to tease, someone easy to dismiss. The owner of the diner frowned as he heard the group. He knew the waitress worked harder than anyone. He also knew she carried a talent greater than they could imagine. He stood behind the counter for a while, listening to their mockery. His patience wore thin. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm. "If you boys want entertainment, we have a piano." He pointed to the corner. "Let's see if she can play it." The room shifted. Customers looked up from their meals, curious. The laughter at the booth grew louder. "Her play? No way," one of them said. But the owner only raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" he replied. "You seem eager to make fun, so let's see if you can do better." The group grew quiet for a moment, then one smirked. "Fine, let her play." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "We could use a laugh." Their friends nodded, grinning as if expecting a disaster. All eyes turned toward the waitress. She froze where she stood, a coffee pot in her hand. Her heart pounded, her palms grew sweaty. She had played the piano many times, but never in front of people, never while they stared at her. Waiting for her to fail, she shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered, but her voice was barely audible. The owner gave her an encouraging nod, not forcing, but steady. The rest of the diner went quiet. Waiting, the teasing group leaned back with smug smiles. Certain this would end in embarrassment, the waitress put the coffee pot down slowly. Her legs felt heavy, as if the floor itself was holding her in place. She wanted to run to the kitchen, to disappear. But another part of her whispered that this was her chance. The chance she had imagined in the quiet nights, the chance to be seen. She walked slowly toward the piano, every step echoing in her chest. Her hands trembled as she sat down on the old bench. The diner seemed to quiet now, every sound magnified. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the soft hum of the neon light outside. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but she couldn't press them. Fear wrapped around her. Fear of failure, fear of laughter, fear of proving the cruel voices right. She glanced up and saw the young men smirking, waiting to laugh again. She saw customers leaning closer, curious, but uncertain. For a moment, she almost stood up, ready to walk away. But then her eyes fell on the piano, her old friend. The one thing that never betrayed her. She remembered the countless nights when it had carried her heart, when its notes had reminded her she was more than a uniform and an apron. She took a deep breath and pressed one key. The sound was soft, shaky, but real. A hush fell over the diner. The group leaned forward, still ready to mock, but quieter now. She pressed another key. Then another. Slowly, the melody began to form. Her hands still trembled, but the notes carried her forward. And though she was still afraid, something inside her began to change. Because in that moment, for the first time, she was not just the waitress. She was a musician standing on the edge of her truth. The unexpected chance, the first notes trembled under her fingers. Soft and uneven, like a whisper trying to break through silence. The old piano groaned, its keys worn from years of being ignored. But the sound was still clear enough to carry across the diner. The crowd leaned in, their forks paused halfway to their mouths, their conversations fading into silence. The waitress pressed on, her fingers remembering what her heart already knew. The melody began to take shape. Each note seemed to push back against the weight of fear. The group of young men still watched with smirks, ready to laugh, but as the music stretched across the room, their smiles grew uncertain. At first, she played timidly, as though each sound might betray her. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes fixed on the keys, but slowly the fear melted away. Her breathing steadied, her hands moved with more confidence. She remembered the countless nights she had played in the empty diner, pouring her soul into the silence. Tonight was no different, except this time, people were listening. One soft chord became another, and soon a gentle song rose from the piano. It was not loud or showy, but it was pure. It had a warmth that touched every corner of the room. Customers leaned back in their seats, their expressions softening. A woman at the counter stopped stirring her coffee, her eyes locked on the waitress as if she were seeing her for the first time. For years, the waitress had hidden this part of herself, believing no one cared. But in this moment, the diner was still, and every ear was waiting for the next note. She felt it, and it gave her strength. The song grew smoother, more alive, as if the piano itself had been waiting for this night. Her voice surprised even her. It slipped out softly, almost shy, yet steady. She had never meant to sing, but the words came naturally, flowing with the music. The sound was gentle, clear, and full of feeling, the kind of voice that carried both strength and pain, like someone who had lived through long nights but never stopped hoping for morning. The diner listened, truly listened, each word wrapped around them, each note pressing into their hearts. The air seemed heavier, not with noise, but with emotion. Even the young men who had teased her grew quiet. Their laughter caught in their throats. Their mocking expressions shifted into something they didn't expect: respect, and maybe even shame. The waitress was no longer aware of them. Her world had shrunk to the piano keys under her hands and the sound of her own voice. She forgot about the teasing, the spilled drinks, and the endless trays. She forgot about being just a waitress. In this moment, she was free. The owner stood behind the counter, his arms crossed but his eyes soft. He had always known she carried something rare. And now the rest of the diner knew too. He nodded slightly, proud but not surprised. The song reached its heart. The melody rose higher, her voice stronger, filling the diner in a way no jukebox or radio ever could. Some customers leaned forward, their faces touched with emotion. One man blinked quickly, as if fighting back tears. A young couple held hands across the table, the music wrapping around them like a quiet blessing. For the waitress, time seemed to vanish. She felt as if she had stepped outside her own life. As if she had become someone new, or maybe someone she had always been, but never dared to show. The music carried her, lifting her above every insult, every laugh, every heavy day of work. When the final notes came, they lingered like a soft echo. Then silence, deep and full. The diner, once filled with chatter and clinking dishes, was now quiet enough to hear the hum of the neon light outside. 4. A breathless moment. No one moved. The waitress sat frozen at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might be heard. She wondered if they would laugh again, if her song had been nothing but foolishness. But then, a single clap broke the silence, followed by another, and then the room erupted. The diner filled with applause. Loud and alive, customers stood, clapping, some even whistling. The sound crashed over her like a wave, warm and overwhelming. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in surprise. She had never expected this. The same people who once looked past her were now cheering. The same group who mocked her sat still, their smirks gone, replaced with faces unsure of what to say. The waitress lowered her head slightly, her cheeks warm. She was not used to this kind of attention, yet deep inside something glowed, a quiet pride she had hidden for so long. That night, a new path opened, though she did not yet see how far it would go. All she knew was that she had played one song, and with it, she had won every heart in the room. The thunder of applause, the clapping in the diner, did not stop. It grew louder, echoing off the walls, filling the small space with a sound that was bigger than the room itself. The waitress sat still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. She had played hundreds of times when no one was watching, but never like this, never with every pair of eyes locked on her. Her cheeks warmed as she lifted her head. The sight startled her. People were smiling, clapping, some even standing from their booths. A few looked misty-eyed, wiping at their faces as though they had felt something they could not explain. The young men who had mocked her sat frozen, their mouths shut, their laughter gone. They shifted in their seats, staring at the table instead of at her. For the first time in a long time, the waitress felt seen. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not just someone in an apron carrying plates. In this moment, she was something more. The owner of the diner leaned on the counter, his expression calm but proud. He had seen her play in the quiet nights. He knew she carried this gift inside her, but even he seemed surprised by the way the room had changed. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, warmer, as though the music had washed away the noise and left only silence and wonder. Slowly, the clapping softened, people returned to their seats, conversations bubbling up again, but they weren't about food or coffee anymore. They were about her. Customers whispered to each other, who knew she could play like that? And that was amazing. She should be on a stage. Their words reached her ears, and each one felt like a spark inside her chest. She stood from the piano, her knees still trembling. She didn't know what to say, so she only gave a small nod and went back to work, picking up plates from a table. Yet every step she took, people's eyes followed her differently now. They weren't looking at a clumsy waitress anymore. They were looking at the woman who had just filled the room with music. When she brought a fresh pot of coffee to a booth, a man smiled warmly. "That was beautiful," he said. She blushed and poured his cup quietly, muttering a soft thank you at another table. A woman reached out and touched her arm gently. "You have a gift. Don't hide it," she whispered. The waitress smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Even the young men who had mocked her earlier stayed quiet. They finished their meals with none of the loud jokes they had thrown before. When they left, they avoided her eyes, one of them mumbling something that sounded almost like an apology. For once, their laughter did not fill the air. Only the soft echo of the piano remained in people's minds, That night, when the diner finally closed, the waitress sat at the piano again. Her hands hovered above the keys, but she didn't play right away. She just sat there, letting the memory of the applause sink in. She could still hear it, see the faces, feel the shift that had taken place. She whispered softly to herself. They listened. It was hard to believe. After all the years of being overlooked, they had truly listened. The sound of their clapping had been louder than all the laughter that had hurt her. For years, she had hidden this part of herself, keeping it locked away out of fear. Fear that people would laugh. Fear that they wouldn't care. But tonight had proven something. She wasn't foolish for dreaming. She wasn't wrong for believing her music mattered. The owner walked past with his keys in hand. He paused, looked at her, and said, "You should play more often." His voice was steady, not dramatic, just honest. Then he left, locking the door behind him. She sat there alone, the piano silent under her hands. A part of her wanted to believe him, to believe she could do more than just serve food and pour coffee. Another part still whispered doubts. What if it had just been luck? What if tomorrow they laughed again? But as she finally pressed one key, listening to its soft echo, she realized something important. The applause wasn't just noise. It was proof. Proof that she had touched people. Proof that her gift was real. The waitress stood and placed the cover back over the piano keys. She tied her apron tighter around her waist and grabbed her bag. As she walked out into the night, the cool air hit her face. She looked up at the sky. The stars faint but steady, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she belonged among them. Tomorrow would bring more trays, more spilled drinks, and maybe more teasing. But tonight had given her something no one could take. Away tonight had given her the sound of applause, the memory of being more than ordinary, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Capturing hearts the next day at the diner felt different. The same chairs, the same booths, the same old neon sign buzzing outside. But the air was not the same. The waitress carried trays, like always, moving carefully between tables, yet she noticed the way people's eyes followed her now. It wasn't the old stares of impatience or the smirks of mockery. It was softer, curious, almost respectful. A couple at the counter whispered when she passed. One of them smiled and said quietly, "You were amazing last night." She nodded, cheeks warming, and quickly poured their coffee at another table. Two older men spoke in low voices. "She's the one who played, right?" "I heard about it." She caught their words, and her heart beat faster. The story was already spreading. That evening, when the diner filled again, something unusual happened. A family asked her if she would play another song after dinner. The request made her pause, tray in hand. Her first instinct was to shake her head, to hide. But the hopeful looks on their faces made her hesitate. The memory of the applause still lived inside her, strong and alive. She gave a shy smile and said, "Maybe." The piano in the corner was no longer just a piece of furniture. People looked at it as if it were waiting for her, and though her hands trembled when she finally sat down that night, she played again. This time, she didn't need pushing from anyone. The choice was hers. The first notes rose, gentle but sure. The diner hushed once more. Forks paused, and the sound carried across the room like a warm breeze. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. Her voice joined the piano, soft and steady and just. Like before, the room changed. The noise of everyday life faded, replaced by something deeper. Customers leaned in closer. Their faces touched with emotion. A child rested her chin on the table, eyes wide with wonder. A man who had stopped only for coffee found himself wiping the corner of his eye. The waitress's music wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, reaching into hearts and pulling on memories people thought they had forgotten. The young men who had mocked her didn't come back that night, but their absence didn't matter anymore. In their place came new faces. Strangers drawn by the quiet rumor of a waitress who played like no one else. Word had traveled fast, and people wanted to see if it was true. The diner, once just a place for late-night meals and quick coffee, began to change. People stayed longer, waiting for the moment when she might sit at the piano. Some came in not for food at all, but for her music. The owner noticed it too, watching the way the seats filled more than before. For the waitress, it was overwhelming. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to being asked for anything other than extra napkins or another refill. Now, people leaned forward and asked gently, "Will you play tonight?" Each time, her heart raced, but slowly she learned to say yes. The more she played, the more confident she became. Her fingers no longer trembled. Her voice grew stronger, clearer, each night. She felt less like she was hiding and more like she was stepping into who she truly was. But it wasn't just about the music. It was about connection. After she played, customers often spoke to her, not just about her songs, but about their own lives. A man told her her music reminded him of his late wife. A woman said it gave her hope on a hard day. A young couple admitted it made them believe in love a little more. Each story left her touched. Each word reminded her that what she carried inside mattered. That her music wasn't only for herself, it was for others too. She had spent years thinking no one cared, but now she realized people were waiting for someone like her. Someone honest, someone real. Still, when she went home at night, she stayed humble. She placed her apron on the chair, looked at her hands, and smiled quietly. The sound of applause and soft voices of thanks replayed in her mind for so long. She had been invisible, but now, little by little, she was becoming something more. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Her music had captured hearts in the small diner. But where it would carry her next, she could not yet imagine. The turning point in the diner had always been a place for late-night food, quiet conversations, and the occasional loud laughter from groups passing through. But lately, it was different. It wasn't just about food anymore. It had become a place where people came to hear music. The waitress still carried trays, refilled cups, and cleaned tables, but her nights now held something new. People asked softly if she would play. And when she sat at the piano, the room grew silent. It didn't matter if the crowd was small or if strangers wandered in by chance. By the time she touched the keys, everyone stayed. Each performance was never the same. Sometimes she played soft songs that felt like a lullaby. Other times, the notes rose high and strong, filling the diner with energy and light. Her voice carried through every song, honest and warm. And every time she finished, the applause followed, steady, real. The young men who had once mocked her stopped showing up. They were replaced by new faces, people who respected her for who she was. It was as though the laughter that once hurt her had been washed away by the sound of clapping hands and kind words. One night, after she played a song, a man in a neat jacket approached the counter. He was not a regular customer. He introduced himself to the owner quietly, and they spoke in low voices. The waitress noticed, but kept working, carrying plates and smiling politely. When the diner closed, the owner pulled her aside. His voice was steady, but carried a weight that made her pause. "That man tonight," he said. "He works with music. He asked about you." Her heart skipped. She didn't know what to say. "Me?" she whispered. The idea felt unreal. She was just a waitress who played after hours. But the owner nodded. "He heard something in your music. He thinks you should share it with more people." The words stayed with her as she walked home. The cool night air pressed against her skin, but inside, she felt warm. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. More people. A bigger stage. Could she even do that? The next evening, she sat at the piano long after closing. Her hands moved across the keys, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered the first night, how her hands shook, how fear nearly kept her silent. She remembered the smirks, the teasing voices, and how the music had silenced them all. She remembered the applause, the way it had filled her with something she had never felt before. For years, she had hidden her talent, convinced it wasn't worth showing. Now, doors seemed to be opening, but stepping through them would mean leaving behind the safety of shadows. It would mean risk. It would mean being seen by the world. The following week, the man in the neat jacket returned. This time, he sat quietly through her performance, listening with full attention. When she finished, he clapped with the rest. Then waited until the crowd thinned before approaching her. His words were kind, not pushy. He told her she had something rare, something people needed to hear. He offered to help her take her music beyond the diner. Her first instinct was to shake her head. She wasn't ready, she wasn't sure. But his words echoed what she had begun. To feel deep down, she knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The piano in the corner had been her secret for too long. And now it was calling her towards something greater. That night, she stood outside the diner, looking at the glowing sign above the door, the same sign she had walked under for years. The same sign that had watched her carry trays, wipe tables, and swallow laughter. Now, under its glow, she whispered to herself, maybe it's time. Her journey was not finished, not even close. The laughter that once tried to crush her had only pushed her toward the truth. She was not ordinary. She was not invisible. She carried music inside her, and the world was beginning to notice as she walked home. She looked up at the sky. The stars stretched wide, endless and silent for the first time. She didn't feel small beneath them. She felt as if her voice might rise to meet them. The turning point had come, and though fear still lingered, hope was stronger. She knew the next step would be bigger than she had ever imagined. A new beginning. The diner had changed in ways no one could have imagined. What was once just a corner place for coffee and late-night meals had become something more. People no longer came only for food. They came for the music. They came to see the quiet waitress who sat at the old piano and turned silence into beauty. Every night, she still worked with her apron tied tight, carrying plates, pouring drinks, smiling at customers. But now, when her shift slowed, all eyes waited for the moment she would walk to the corner, sit on the worn bench, and place her hands on the keys. And every night, the same thing happened. Diner grew quiet, the first notes rose, and hearts leaned closer. The man in the neat jacket returned often, always listening carefully. He spoke gently to her when the crowds left, reminding her she had a gift that could reach further than 4 diner walls. At first, she resisted, afraid of change, afraid of leaving behind the safe place where her music had first been heard. But slowly, she began to understand that his words were not just flattery, they were truth. Her music was more than entertainment. It was connection. It was healing. People left the diner carrying her songs in their hearts. Some returned with friends, telling them, "Have to hear her play." Soon, the room was fuller each night, and sometimes there were no empty seats at all. The owner noticed too. He didn't push her, but his small nods and kind eyes told her he believed in her future. He knew she wasn't meant to stay in the shadows forever. One evening, as she finished a song, the applause was louder than ever. Customers stood from their tables, clapping until their hands were red. A little girl ran up to her and whispered, "I want to play like you one day." The waitress bent down, smiled, and said softly, "You can." Her voice shook with emotion, because she saw herself in that child's, the same dream, the same longing to be more. It was then she realized something important. Her music wasn't only about her own escape anymore. It was about giving something to others, reminding them of hope, love, and beauty, even in the middle of an ordinary night. Weeks later, she agreed to perform outside the diner for the first time. It was just a small gathering, Nothing grand, but for her, it felt huge. She wore no apron, no tray in her hands, only her heart on her sleeve as she walked to the piano. The crowd was larger than she had ever faced, but when she pressed the first note, the same magic returned, the same hush fell, the same warmth spread, and once again, her music carried her fear away. From that moment, doors opened wider. Invitations came, each one leading her further into a world she once thought impossible. She never forgot the diner, though. Never forgot the corner piano that gave her courage. She still returned often, playing for the regulars who had been there since the beginning. For them, she wasn't just a musician, she was family. And the story of the night when a group of men teased her. When she sat down, trembling but brave, when she played one song and silenced a roommate, became part of her legend. People retold it again and again because it spoke of something true. It wasn't just about music. It was about standing tall when the world tried to push you down. Years later, when she looked back, she smiled at how it all began, a small diner. An old piano laughter that once hurt, and the sound of applause that changed everything. She had been an ordinary waitress in the eyes of many, but inside her was something extraordinary. She only needed one chance, one moment, one song, and when she took that chance, she didn't just win their ears, she won their hearts. Her journey was still unfolding, but one truth had already been written. She was no longer invisible, no longer just anything. She was proof that even the most overlooked person can carry a light strong enough to brighten an entire room. And that night, as she sat at her piano once more, playing for a crowd that filled the diner wall to wall, she knew she had stepped into her new beginning, a beginning born from music, courage, and the belief that no gift should ever stay hidden.